They called her shot impossible because she fired at something that hadn't happened yet. When the analysts scrubbed through the footage frame by frame, everything looked normal at first. A quiet rooftop buried under dust and broken concrete. A sniper lying prone, her cheek pressed against a weathered rifle. Nothing moved. Nothing signaled danger. The world was still. And yet, she pulled the trigger. 5 seconds early. To the naked eye, it looked like panic. A mistake. A shot fired into emptiness. But the timestamp told a different story. The bullet left the barrel long before the enemy appeared on screen, long before any shadow shifted, long before anyone could have known what was coming. That was the first mystery. The second was this. Every soldier who stood beside her that night swore she saved their lives. They didn't know how. They didn't know why. They only knew she fired before the world caught up. Her name was Specter Five. People assumed it was a code name chosen by command, something to make her sound dangerous or mysterious, but the truth was simpler. She earned it, not through fear, but through silence. Specter. Because she saw things no one else saw. Five. Because she lived 5 seconds ahead of everyone around her. The night it happened, she was alone on a rooftop overlooking the broken edge of a war-torn city. The sky was thick with smoke. The air carried the cold taste of metal. Her rifle lay steady, crosshairs drifting over empty streets. Nothing moved, no hostiles, no shapes, no reason to lift the safety. And yet her breathing shifted. Slow at first, then controlled, measured, focused, like she was listening to something no one else could hear. She tapped the trigger guard, once a habit, a ritual, the kind of motion snipers make when they're preparing for a shot they haven't taken yet. But she wasn't preparing, she was reacting to something the rest of the world couldn't see. The wind changed. A faint vibration trembled in her fingertips. Her pupils tightened, her jaw locked. She wasn't looking at the present anymore. She was staring into the next moment, one no one else had reached yet. In the control room, when investigators replayed the footage later, they froze on the frame right before she fired. They expected to find something, anything, that justified her shot. A glint of metal, a shifting shadow, a reflection, even the slightest twitch of an enemy rifle. But the screen stayed empty. The rooftop stayed silent. Specter 5 stayed still, until the second she didn't. Her finger squeezed the trigger. The recoil snapped through her shoulder. A bullet tore from the barrel, and for a breathless fraction of a second, it looked like she fired into absolute nothingness. Then, 5 seconds later, a hostile shape broke from the darkness. A rifle lifted, a muzzle flashed. A life-threatening shot lined up perfectly with the path of the bullet she had already fired. Her round struck him before his finger finished pulling the trigger. That was the moment the analysts realized something was wrong. Not with her shot, with time itself. Specter 5 didn't wait for danger. She met it halfway. Some say she sensed the enemy's intent before he acted. Some say trauma rewired her instincts. Others whisper she saw battlefield patterns too fast for human perception. But the truth lived only inside her mind. And tonight, you're going to see what she saw. Specter 5 wasn't born with this ability. She wasn't built in a lab. She wasn't raised by some classified program hidden behind steel doors and black budgets. She was ordinary until she wasn't. Long before the rooftop, long before the impossible shot, there were signs. Quiet moments most people forget, but she remembered in perfect detail, almost painfully so. As a child, she reacted to things before they happened. A falling glass she caught without looking. A ball she dodged before anyone threw it. A car horn she stepped away from a heartbeat too early. Adults called her intuitive. Teachers called her sensitive. Her mother called her different, but no one paid attention because small miracles often hide inside ordinary days. Years later, during basic training, those little moments turned into patterns. The instructors noticed her reaction times first. She wasn't the strongest, she wasn't the fastest, but she moved before others thought to, turned before others heard a sound, lowered her head an instant before a flashbang detonated, reacted to the sharp snap of danger before it existed. Most recruits hesitated. She didn't. Her drill sergeant assumed it was luck. Then he assumed it was instinct. Then he realized it wasn't either. During reflex drills, she pressed the trigger before the buzzer sounded. Not after. Before. The instructors blamed the equipment. They recalibrated the sensors. They tested her again. Same result. She reacted to a moment that technically hadn't arrived. The psychologists wrote notes in cold, clinical language: hypervigilance, trauma sensitivity, reflex anticipation, words to explain something none of them understood. But she understood. Because the sensation wasn't mystical. It wasn't supernatural. It was a simple, quiet pressure behind her ribs, a whisper telling her the world was about to shift, even though it hadn't yet. She learned to trust that whisper, even when it scared her, especially when it scared her. Then came the blast. The day everything changed. The day her mind stopped living in one moment and slipped into another. It happened during a routine patrol that wasn't supposed to be dangerous, the kind of assignment everyone complains about. Long hours, dead roads, nothing to write home about. The sun was brutal, the silence heavier than usual. The convoy rolled forward, engines humming against the dry heat. She was second from the front, scanning, listening, breathing in slow, steady rhythm. And then the whisper inside her didn't just nudge, it screamed. Her chest tightened, her pulse spiked. Her hand shot out toward the driver, even though she didn't know why she shouted one word. "Stop!" Her voice cracked with urgency she couldn't explain. The driver looked at her, confused. He opened his mouth to argue, and then the road exploded. The shock wave hurled the vehicle sideways. Metal screamed, glass shattered. Her ears rang until the world went numb. Dust swallowed the convoy in a choking storm of heat and debris. Bodies hit the ground, voices blurred, her vision fractured. But even through the chaos, she felt the whisper again. Only now it wasn't early footsteps or shifting shadows. It was something deeper, heavier, like her mind split open and let time seep in through the cracks. Everything slowed. The dust hung in the air like frozen smoke. A fragment of metal drifted past her face with unnatural weight. Her own heartbeat echoed like distant thunder, each thud ringing longer than it should. Her breath stretched into long, impossible seconds. She wasn't fast, she wasn't calm. She was suspended, caught in a moment too large for her body to hold. When she blinked, the world snapped back. The ringing in her ears returned. The dust collapsed. The screams rushed in. But something inside her had changed. She didn't know it yet. But Specter Five was born in that explosion. In the weeks that followed, her perception sharpened beyond anything she had felt before. She didn't just sense danger. She felt approaching moments before they arrived, felt the world twisting a breath early. And for the first time in her life, she couldn't ignore it, because now it wasn't quiet moments or harmless coincidences. Now, the future was loud, and it was getting louder. In the aftermath of the blast, the military assumed Specter Five needed rest, time to heal, time to breathe, time to forget. But she wasn't forgetting anything. If anything, she was remembering too much. Every sound around her felt like an echo from the future. Footsteps in the hallway reached her ears before the boots touched the floor. A nurse's hand hovered above her arm long before the warmth of contact reached her skin. Even conversations sounded late, as if her mind had already lived the words before anyone spoke them. She tried to hide it at first. She didn't want to be labeled unstable, didn't want to be pulled from the field, didn't want to be treated like a cracked piece of equipment that needed replacing. But the signs kept coming. During recovery drills, she placed her hand on a railing an instant before her balance shifted. She lifted her foot a moment before someone bumped her shoulder. She turned her head a heartbeat before a medic dropped a metal tray behind her. It wasn't instinct anymore. It wasn't timing. It wasn't luck. It was awareness, arriving too early. And no matter how she tried to control it, the sensation kept growing stronger. Before the blast, she lived split seconds ahead. After the blast, those split seconds became longer, more precise, more vivid. The psychologist called it heightened vigilance from trauma, but she could feel the truth in her bones. This wasn't fear, it wasn't stress, it wasn't imagination, it was timing. Raw, sharpened timing. A sense that the world around her was shifting, just slightly slower than she was. She began noticing tiny movements most people never see. A soldier tense his jaw before speaking, a flicker in someone's eye before they changed emotion, the smallest recoil of fingers before tightening around an object. At first, it felt like a skill, a sharpened advantage, a tool she could use, but quickly, it became a burden because the more she saw, the less she could ignore. One night, during a routine evaluation, she was instructed to walk down a dimly lit hallway. Nothing unusual, just a straight path from one door to the next, but halfway through, she stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. A shiver crawled across her spine, her muscles clenched on instinct she didn't understand. And then, 1 second later, a metal cart rolled suddenly from a side room, crossing the hall exactly where she would have been standing. If she hadn't stopped, she would have been hit hard. The nurse pushing the cart apologized, flustered. Specter said nothing. But inside, she felt the whisper again. The next test was worse. An instructor dropped a heavy wooden baton behind her to measure reaction time, a simple exercise, standard. But she turned around before it fell. She didn't hear it. She didn't feel it. She just knew it was slipping from his hand before gravity acted. The instructor froze in disbelief. She pretended she didn't notice his stare. The incident got reported. Higher-ups took interest. She was sent to a classified reflex measurement facility that used sensors capable of tracking microseconds. They asked her to press a button as soon as she heard a beep. Simple. She pressed it before the beep, again and again and again. Not a millisecond early, not 2, but consistently about 5. The technicians argued. The equipment was recalibrated. The system was reset. She was tested with dozens of sound patterns, frequencies, intervals. The results didn't change. She lived 5 seconds ahead of the instructions she was given. Word spread through the facility, not openly, not in reports, in whispers. By the end of the week, she was summoned by someone who didn't wear a uniform, someone whose ID was blank, someone who didn't introduce himself. He simply asked one question. When did it start? She didn't know how to answer. She didn't know if she should answer, but the truth rose uninvited. The blast, she said quietly. The man nodded like he expected that answer. And since then? He asked. She hesitated, not out of fear, but because she didn't know how to put the sensation into words. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a vision. It wasn't a thought. It was a pull, a tug on her awareness, a shift in perspective that arrived before the world shifted with it. She told him this, carefully, slowly. He didn't react with disbelief or confusion or mockery. He simply said, "You're not the first." Her blood ran cold. She wanted to ask what he meant, who he meant, how many others existed. But before she could speak, he stood. "Our world is built on seconds," he said, "but war is built on half seconds, and some people learn to move through them differently." She felt a chill settle in her bones. Then he said something she would never forget. "Your curse," he whispered, "isn't that you see early. It's that you feel everything sooner." And with that, he left the room. Specter sat alone in that dim room long after the door clicked shut. His words sank into her like cold water. Feel everything sooner. Not see, not sense. Feel. She didn't want it to be true. But deep inside, she already knew it was, because the worst part of her ability wasn't predicting danger. It was predicting pain. A soldier flinching from an unseen threat, a friend about to break under pressure, a teammate about to get hurt. She felt the impact before it happened, the fear before it surfaced, the loss before it arrived. And once you feel something early, you can't unfeel it. She returned to active status weeks later, carrying a mind sharper than before and a heart heavier than she wanted to admit. The world moved normally for everyone else, but for her, it felt like a replay, a delayed signal, a moment she had already lived. Sometimes she tried to ignore the sensation, pretend she was normal, pretend she wasn't ahead of everything around her, but the world kept proving otherwise. During weapons training, she corrected her aim before the wind shifted. On patrol, she stopped walking before someone dropped a crate behind her. In briefing rooms, she responded to questions seconds before instructors finished asking them. It unnerved people, made them stare a little too long. Whisper her name in ways that didn't feel like admiration. Specter Five, a title she didn't earn through rank or medals, but through quiet, undeniable difference. Then came the night everything changed again. Her team was assigned to a border watch post. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. One of those assignments soldiers barely remember afterward. A lonely ridge of broken stone, a bunker that smelled like rust and a sky torn open with wind. She sat behind her rifle, watching the horizon, dull, quiet, endless. Hours slipped by. Her breathing stayed steady, her mind stayed alert, and then she felt it. That impossible tug, that pull on her awareness that didn't belong to the present, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a surge. Her pulse jumped, her fingers tightened on the rifle, her vision tunneled, not from fear, but focus too sharp to be natural. Something was coming, something she couldn't see, something the world hadn't reached yet. She scanned the darkness, nothing moved. Her teammates joked behind her, unaware of the shift in her expression. She lowered her head slightly, slowed her breath, listened, not to sound, but to the feeling, and the feeling told her the future was walking toward them. She didn't shout, didn't panic, didn't warn the others, not yet, because she didn't know what was coming, only that it had already begun. A minute passed, then another. Silence pressed against her skin, and then it hit her. Not danger, not violence, but a memory. A memory of when her instincts first saved her life, long before she held a rifle, long before she wore a uniform. A moment from years ago, buried deep, pulling itself back to the surface. Because sometimes the mind drags old warnings forward when new danger approaches. Sometimes survival isn't about the future, but the past we never understood. Her jaw clenched as the realization burned through her. Her instincts had saved her once before, and now they were screaming again. She lifted her head and looked out over the dark ridge, eyes narrowed, breath slow. Something was out there, something the present couldn't see. Something the future had already shown her. And for the first time since the blast, she understood the terrible truth. She wasn't just 5 seconds ahead anymore. The gap was growing. Specter stayed frozen at the edge of that ridge, her eye fixed on the darkness stretching out before her. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, yet her heartbeat thudded with the certainty of something approaching. Not footsteps, not shadows, a feeling. A memory she didn't invite rose like smoke at the back of her mind. Years before she wore a uniform, she had been walking home from school, a normal day, a normal street. Cars humming, children playing, the lazy warmth of evening sunlight leaking through the trees. Nothing dangerous, nothing threatening. And yet, halfway across the road, she stopped. There was no sound, no warning, no visible threat, but her body refused to move. A second later, a motorbike burst around the corner at full speed, swerving wildly, missing her by inches before crashing into a parked car. People screamed. Glass shattered, metal split open. She hadn't seen it, she hadn't heard it, she had just stopped. It was the first moment she ever wondered if her instincts were different. Standing at the ridge now, with the desert wind cutting against her skin, she felt that same paralyzing certainty. Not fear, not hesitation, just that invisible pull telling her she existed a little ahead of her own life. She exhaled slowly. Behind her, one of her teammates laughed at a joke, another argued over a card game, a third hummed quietly. None of them noticed her stillness. None sensed the shift in the air. She didn't blame them. This kind of awareness wasn't teachable, wasn't logical, wasn't human. She lifted her rifle again, resting her cheek against the cold stock. The metal felt steady, familiar, safe. Her scope swept across empty terrain, still nothing. But her pulse didn't lie. She felt danger rising, like heat beneath sand. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to rest, to focus. And then something unusual happened, something she had never felt so clearly. For a fraction of a second, the world around her paused. The air stilled, the wind held its breath, the horizon seemed to freeze, and then it shifted, not physically, not visibly. But in her mind, the future arrived early, a flash of movement, a silhouette, the metallic glint of a rifle. Not here, not yet, but soon. Her eyes snapped open. She knew before she saw anything, someone was coming. Her hands tightened, her breath steadied, her muscles locked into a sniper's patience, still, cold, absolute. But she didn't fire, not yet, because she didn't aim at the present, she aimed at the moment the future would catch up. She leaned forward slightly, letting the crosshairs drift to a patch of darkness where the world felt heavy, like the air was already bending around a shape that hadn't stepped into view. Her teammates still hadn't noticed her tension. Their jokes filled the background, warm and careless. Part of her wanted to shout, to warn them, to pull them into the moment she was already living. But another part knew they wouldn't listen, not until the future arrived too late for them. Specter inhaled, steady and controlled. A question surfaced inside her. Uninvited. Uncomfortable. What moment in their lives would they change if they had a warning like hers? It was a thought she didn't want to entertain. Not now. Not here. But the memory of her own near miss as a child pressed firmly into her mind, and she knew this was the right moment, the only moment, for the first audience reflection. Her voice in the narration turns quieter, more reflective. Everyone has a moment where instinct takes over, a moment that stays with you. What's a moment where your instinct saved you? The question lingered in the air, soft, honest, human. Specter didn't have the luxury to linger on it herself, because the silence ahead of her finally broke a faint tremor in the sand, a shift in the wind, a shape peeling itself out of the night. Her eyes steadied, her muscles locked. Her rifle followed the movement with eerie precision. The future was no longer a whisper. It was here. The shape emerged slowly, almost reluctantly, as if the darkness itself was giving it permission to exist. A faint outline, a shoulder, the subtle tilt of a weapon held close to the body, barely visible to a normal eye. But Specter wasn't living in the normal moment. She steadied her breath, letting it settle deep in her lungs. Each inhale felt like it belonged to a different timeline. Each exhale tightened her focus onto the patch of night that was still catching up to her. Her finger hovered above the trigger, not touching, not trembling, just waiting for the world to align with what she already knew. Behind her, the team finally noticed the shift in her posture. "You see something?" one whispered. She didn't answer, because it hadn't happened yet. Another shape peeled into view, then another, less like figures approaching, more like the future filling itself in. "Specter?" someone pressed, stepping closer. She lifted her hand, just a small motion, but it silenced the entire ridge. The joking stopped. The laughter died. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Her teammates trusted her instincts, but trust only went so far. What they didn't know was that she wasn't seeing something. She was remembering something she hadn't lived yet. The whispers inside her sharpened, turning into a pressure at the back of her skull. Her pulse synced with a rhythm she felt coming from the horizon. Her eyes narrowed, tracking movements still forming in the darkness. More shapes materialized, slow, silent, deliberate. Her team's tension thickened into dread. "How many?" a soldier whispered. She didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't know, but because the number hadn't fully arrived yet. Then the future clicked into place. 40, she murmured. The team exchanged looks. 40 wasn't a patrol, wasn't a scouting line. 40 was an attack force. "Where?" another asked. Specter adjusted her sights an inch to the left, not toward where the enemy was, but where they would be. "Here," she said. One word, cold, final, unavoidable. Her teammates cursed under their breath. Weapons raised, heartbeats quickened, but Specter stayed still. It wasn't time yet, because she felt something deeper in the next moment, something heavier than the silhouettes forming ahead. A shift, not in the terrain, but in the timeline. The attack hadn't fully begun. She could sense the delay, the hesitation, the fraction of a second before motion turned into violence. That sliver of time, that tiny window between threat and reality, was her domain. Her eyes flicked between the shapes, tracking paths her team couldn't see yet, lines of movement that only existed in her mind, trajectories forming before rifles lifted. A teammate crouched beside her. "What do we do?" he whispered. Specter didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed locked on the future, unraveling ahead. "Wait," she said softly. It didn't make sense to them. Every instinct soldiers are trained with screams to prepare, to act, to move. But Specter's instincts came from a place beyond training. The silence between her team and the approaching attackers stretched tight, thin as a wire, ready to snap. And then it did. A single shape shifted more confidently. A shoulder rolled forward, a boot pressed into sand, a rifle angled toward the ridge. The attack had begun. Specter's pulse sharpened. She whispered, barely loud enough to hear. 3 seconds. Her team froze. They didn't understand the words, not fully, but they obeyed. Specter exhaled, not slow, not fast, just precise. The world around her dimmed, as if the present was losing its grip. The air pressed against her skin like it was sliding backward. And then, her mind stepped into the moment the enemy hadn't reached yet. She lifted her rifle, locked her sights, aligned with the target, still raising his weapon. Her finger tightened. The shot cracked across the ridge, slicing through the night with a thunder that arrived late to her ears. Her bullet reached the attacker before the attacker fully realized he had lifted his rifle. Her team flinched from the sound. But Specter didn't. She had already lived it, and the enemy, every one of them, was only just arriving in the moment she had already seen. The moment her first shot landed, the ridge erupted into chaos. Shouts, scrambling boots, metal scraping against rock, the thundering rush of bodies trying to react to a threat they hadn't expected. But to Specter, none of it was chaos. It was sequence, order, a pattern unfolding exactly the way she had already seen it. Her team fired blindly at the dark outline of the ridge below, reacting to shadows and shapes just starting to move. But she wasn't reacting. She was confirming. Her rifle snapped left. Another shape leaned forward, weapon rising. Her bullet hit him before his sight even aligned. Her mind drifted a little further ahead, not seeing exact details, but feeling the rhythm of the attack. The way trained fighters coordinate silently, the way breath sinks before a group charges, the way intent forms just before motion follows. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't magic. It was awareness sharpened beyond instinct, beyond training, beyond the narrow lane of the present. To Specter, the battlefield didn't happen in real time. It unfurled like a memory she hadn't lived yet. She tracked the third target before he broke into a sprint, the fourth before he adjusted his grip, the fifth before he even realized he had chosen her team as a target. Shots rang out, hers first, then her team's weapons joining a moment later. The ridge flashed with bursts of muzzle fire, the night filled with debris and echoing thunder. But Specter's breath stayed steady, her pulse synced to a rhythm no one else could hear. She whispered into the darkness, almost to herself. 2 seconds. Her teammate beside her jerked his head. What? But there was no time for explanation. Specter shifted her aim again, trusting the pull in her chest, trusting the moment she knew was coming. An attacker shifted from cover. Specter fired before he finished the movement. She didn't wait for confirmation. She didn't need it. Another shape, another breath, another round ripping through the dark. Time folded itself around her awareness, expanding then stretching thin, letting her slip 3 seconds ahead of reality. Her team shouted commands, tried to form a line, tried to make sense of the assault, but the enemy wasn't confused. They knew exactly what they were doing. This was a coordinated attack, planned, timed, executed, except for one flaw in their plan. They hadn't accounted for someone who didn't live inside the same slice of time. A burst of fire lit the ridge below, revealing a cluster of attackers preparing to flank. Specter felt the shift before they moved. Her hands moved faster than she could think. She fired once, twice, a third time. Her team hadn't even noticed the flank forming yet. By the time they shifted to look, the threat was already falling to the ground. Her commander shouted her name, not in panic, not in anger, in disbelief. But she didn't answer. Her focus was locked beyond the present moment because the rhythm of the attack was changing, tightening, compressing. They weren't just attacking blindly, they were adjusting to her. Someone on the other side had noticed her timing. Specter felt it before she understood it. A distant figure, barely visible, stopped moving like the others. He paused, analyzed, measured the space between shots, measured her pattern. He wasn't reacting to where she was aiming. He was reacting to where she would aim. Specter's breath caught, not in fear, but awareness. Finally, someone else had stepped closer to her timeline. A commander, an enemy marksman, someone with experience, someone who understood rhythm. He crouched low, using shadows and broken stone to steady his aim. Specter shifted her sights toward him, but something felt wrong. She felt the future pull sharply, like a rope suddenly yanked tight. She wasn't 5 seconds ahead anymore. She was slipping back. The enemy marksman had interfered with her rhythm. Her pulse sharpened. Her breath tightened. For a moment, a terrifying moment, she felt the present catching up to her. And that's when she realized this fight wasn't just about bullets. It was about time, about who could reach the next second first. Specter steadied herself, her breath thinning into a controlled thread. She could feel it, her advantage slipping, the world around her tightening its grip, the future no longer drifting gently into her awareness, but flickering like a weak signal, fighting static. The enemy marksman stayed, crouched, unmoving, watching, not charging, not firing, studying her. He was patient, experienced, dangerous in ways that didn't require numbers or force. Her team fired into the darkness around them, unaware that the most lethal threat wasn't the swarm of attackers, but the silent figure determining the tempo of the fight. Specter pressed her cheek against the rifle stock again. Her eye aligned with the scope. Her pulse hammered once, steady and deep. She tried to feel ahead, to sense the next second, the next breath, the next motion, but the rhythm was fractured. The future wasn't sliding into place like it always did. It was jittering, lagging, trying to catch up to her instead. The marksman lifted his rifle, not fully, not fast, just an inch. But that movement, that tiny, deliberate inch, sent a shock through her awareness. She couldn't see where he would be. She could only see where he was, and that terrified her more than the 40 attackers below. Her breath tightened in her chest. She tried again to feel the pull of the moment ahead, tried to reach for the timeline that always stretched before her. Nothing. It was like the blast had given her a gift, and this marksman had reached into that gift and closed the lid. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the horrifying unfamiliarity of being stuck in the present. Her teammate crouched beside her, panting. "What's happening?" he whispered. She ignored the question, not out of arrogance, out of necessity, because she didn't have answers anymore. She adjusted her aim slightly, following a sensation that felt weaker than usual, like a dying echo instead of a leading voice. The marksman didn't move, didn't rush, didn't break his posture. He was watching her, waiting for her tell, waiting for her pattern, waiting for the moment she would fire so he could fire first. Specter inhaled slowly. Her throat felt tight, her chest felt heavy. She tried again to reach the next second. Still nothing. Panic clawed at the edges of her focus, but she trapped it inside long, steady breaths. She couldn't afford fear. Not here. Not now. Then something shifted. Not in the future, not in the present, but inside herself. A memory, not of instinct, not of danger, of regret. The moment she froze before crossing a street, the moment the motorbike nearly killed her, the moment her instincts saved her life before she understood why her breathing steadied. Her eyes softened, and she realized something important. Her ability didn't start with sight, or sound, or even the future. It started with emotion. Fear arrived early. Dread arrived early. Regret arrived early. Her body didn't warn her of events, it warned her of outcomes. She didn't sense motion, she sensed consequence. She let that truth settle in her bones, and suddenly, the future didn't snap back into place. But the pull returned. Faint, weak, but real. Enough. She exhaled. Slow, precise. The marksman tensed, sensing her readiness. Two fighters locked across distance, both reading the same moment, both hunting for the next second. Specter felt the shift. Not clearly, not like before, but enough to know where his rifle would aim next. Not at her head, not at her chest, lower, at her team. She didn't wait. Specter squeezed the trigger. Her shot tore through the quiet. The marksman fired in the same instant. Both bullets left their barrels together. Two streaks slicing through the night, two choices made at the same moment, two lives depending on who reached the next second first. Her team ducked instinctively. The shots whistled past. One struck rock behind them, spraying dust. The other, hers, hit the marksman square in the shoulder. He stumbled, lost his aim, dropped behind cover. Specter's breath released in a trembling exhale. Her ability wasn't fully back, but she wasn't trapped in the present anymore. The pull was returning, and she knew the fight wasn't close to over because the attackers below had seen their marksman fall, and now they were coming for her. The moment the marksman disappeared behind the rocks, the rest of the attackers surged forward. No more hesitation, no more stealth. They had lost their eyes, their timing, their anchor, and now they were desperate. Specter felt the shift instantly. The future didn't rush back all at once. It eased in, like a weak signal regaining strength, a faint tug, a whisper, an outline of the next moment crawling slowly into her awareness. Not enough to see clearly, enough to survive. Her team dropped behind cover as bullets tore through the ridge, ripping chunks of stone into the air. Lights flickered below as the attackers spread out, trying to surround them. Her commander crawled toward her. "Specter, talk to me! What are we dealing with?" She kept her eye to the scope, her voice calm, too calm for the chaos around them. 37 left, she said. "How do you—" He stopped himself. He already knew better than to ask. Another barrage of gunfire hammered their position. The ridge vibrated under the force. Dust rained from the rocks above. Her teammates fired back, blindly at first, then with controlled bursts as shapes moved in and out of shadows. But Specter didn't fire yet. Not because she couldn't, because the moment hadn't aligned. She swept the scope across the battlefield, her pulse sinking with the faint pull inside her chest. She felt the attackers' movements, not the steps they were taking, but the steps they were about to take. A runner, then a climber, then a flanker trying to slip behind the team. Her breathing slowed, her awareness sharpened, the timeline stretched. She whispered, soft but certain, "Left flank." Her teammate turned just in time to see an attacker sprinting toward them. He fired. The runner collapsed. Specter didn't celebrate. This wasn't victory. This was inevitability catching up. The pull grew stronger. She shifted her aim 2 inches. The world seemed to delay, just slightly. A shadow leaned forward in the distance. She fired. The shot landed a moment before the attacker broke into a sprint. Her commander stared at her in disbelief. "Specter, how are you doing this?" She didn't answer. Because she wasn't certain herself. The future wasn't a clear window anymore. It was fragments, ripples, pieces of the next second drifting toward her. But each piece was enough. Her team tightened their line, firing with renewed confidence. They weren't winning, far from it, but they weren't drowning under the ambush anymore. Specter fired again and again, each shot landing just ahead of danger, each moment anchored by the faint echo of what was about to happen. But then, something changed, not with the enemy, with her. The pull inside her didn't stay steady, it surged, stronger than before, deeper than before. Like the future wasn't just approaching, it was collapsing into her. Her breath hitched, her muscles tensed. The ridge flickered in her mind, twice, then again. For a terrifying second, she wasn't one moment ahead, she was many. She felt danger from every direction, not in sequence but layered, stacked, overlapping. 37 attackers, multiple angles, multiple intentions, multiple outcomes. Her pulse hammered with the weight of it. The future didn't feel linear anymore. It felt heavy. She steadied herself, forcing her breath back under control. She didn't have the luxury to fall apart, not with her team relying on her, not with attackers closing in, not with the marksman still somewhere in the dark, wounded but dangerous. A teammate shouted, "They're getting closer!" Specter's hands tightened on the rifle. She could feel the next moment forming. Not clearly, but with enough certainty to know she needed to act. She whispered to her team, "Hold this line, no matter what." Then she focused on the battlefield, not the present, not the noise, not the chaos, the consequences. She let the weight of the future settle, and the timeline sharpened. The pull inside her snapped into clarity, a single, undeniable direction. She turned her rifle toward the darkest corner of the ridge. Her teammate frowned. "I don't see anything." "You will," she said. Her voice didn't shake, didn't rise, just delivered truth, because Specter 5 had just felt the next outcome, and she knew exactly what moment was coming. The corner of the ridge she aimed at looked empty, still, silent. Just a pit of darkness, swallowed by deeper shadows. But Specter wasn't looking for shapes. She was looking for intention. Her breath thinned again, sharpening into that strange emotional pressure she had started to trust. Not sight, not prediction. A feeling, arriving ahead of the world. A shiver of consequence. Her teammate shifted beside her, confusion etched across his voice. "Specter, what's out there?" She didn't blink, didn't move, didn't answer. Because the future had arrived again, softly, like a warning sliding under a door. She felt the outcome before she saw the threat. Someone was about to break from that darkness, someone fast, someone reckless, someone who believed they could slip past her line. She lifted her finger toward the trigger. 3, 2, 1. A shape exploded from the shadows, sprinting uphill with wild speed. Her teammates gasped. Specter fired. The figure dropped instantly, skidding across the stone. She didn't celebrate, didn't even breathe, because the pull inside her wasn't easing, it was growing. Her commander yelled over the chaos, "How many more?" She blinked once, steady and focused. Too many. Gunfire erupted again, this time closer, sharper. The attackers had closed the distance. Shadows darted along the lower rocks, firing upward at the ridge, bullets snapping past with angry sparks. Her team fired down, shouting orders, trying to hold the line. They weren't coordinated. They weren't ready. They weren't seeing what she saw coming. Specter scanned the ridge again, the pull in her chest now, a deep, throbbing warning. The attackers weren't going to stop. They weren't retreating. They weren't hesitating. They were committing. And that meant something worse, something she felt before she understood. The timeline split, not literally, not visually, but emotionally. She felt two outcomes layered on top of each other like ghosts, one where her team held the line, one where they didn't. That pressure inside her chest tightened, squeezing like an invisible fist. She forced a slow breath into her lungs, steadying her mind, pulling herself back into a place where she could think clearly. A teammate called out, "They're trying to push right." Another shouted, "No, left side is breaking." Her commander growled, "Specter, where do we focus?" She almost answered, almost spoke the truth, but the future jumped, jerked sharply, like a needle skipping across a record. The pull inside her chest wrenched in a direction she didn't expect. Not left, not right, behind them. Her eyes widened. Someone had looped around the ridge, someone fast, someone quiet. She spun her rifle just as a shadow lunged upward from the rear slope, weapon raised. Her team hadn't seen it, hadn't heard it, hadn't even thought to check that blind corner. She fired. The shot cracked through the air. The attacker collapsed inches from the ridgeline. Her team jerked back in shock. How did you know?" someone shouted. Specter didn't answer, because even she didn't like the truth. She hadn't sensed movement. She hadn't sensed danger. She had sensed the outcome of someone dying and pulled the present back into alignment. Her commander crawled closer, lowering his head beside hers. "Specter, talk to me. Are you seeing things? Hearing things? What's happening in that head of yours?" She didn't break her stance, didn't lift her eyes from the battlefield. "It's consequences," she said. Her voice was low, haunted, certain. "I feel them before they happen." The words chilled her team. Even over the gunfire, even over the shouts, even over the rising storm of danger, the silence that followed her statement felt heavier than the ridge itself. Consequence, not prediction, not instinct, consequence. She was living inside the emotional fallout of the next second. Her commander swallowed hard. "And what do you feel now?" She didn't want to answer, not because she didn't know, but because the truth sat like ice in her stomach. She finally spoke, barely more than a breath. "I feel something worse coming." The words lingered in the air, fragile and terrifying. Her team tightened their grips on their weapons. Shadows shifted below. Bullets carved lines into the rock. The ridge shook with approaching footsteps. And Specter. Specter felt the future folding in again. Only this time it wasn't giving her a path, it was giving her a warning. The warning inside her deepened into something colder than fear. Not a direction, not a target, a moment. Her breath stalled as the realization hit her. The attackers weren't the threat, they were clearing the way for something behind them. A new shape emerged through the darkness, slow, steady, deliberate. Not wild like the others, not rushing, not hiding, command. She felt the truth before she saw him. Their real leader had arrived. Her commander whispered, "Specter, is that?" "Yes." The man didn't raise a weapon. He didn't need to. The attackers moved with a single purpose now, shifting their formation, buying him the space he needed. To line up one perfect shot, Specter's pulse hammered. Her ability finally snapped into clarity. She didn't see his movement. She saw the outcome of it. If he fired now, someone on her team would die, and she felt exactly who it would be. Her commander, right beside her. The future tightened around her like a noose. She didn't think, didn't breathe, didn't wait. She moved, shoving her commander down and swinging her rifle toward the enemy leader in one motion. The future and the present collided in her chest, an explosion of consequence, fear, and certainty. Her finger pressed the trigger. His did too. 2 shots cracked through the ridge. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Dust floated. Stone trembled. Her team froze. Then the enemy commander staggered back, a spreading bloom of red on his chest. Specter's shot had found him first. The attackers faltered. Their formation wavered. Without their leader, their purpose crumbled. Within seconds, the ambush broke apart. Shadows retreated. Silence swallowed the ridge again. Her team looked around in stunned disbelief, weapons shaking, breaths sharp and uneven. Specter lowered her rifle slowly. Her commander rose behind her, still processing what happened. "You saved my life," he whispered. She didn't answer, because the future was quiet now, finally, blessedly quiet. The pull inside her chest dissolved into something soft, not warning, not fear, just breath. Her commander touched her shoulder gently. "What do you feel now?" Specter looked out over the dark valley. For the first time all night there was no tremor in her vision, no second moment layered over the first. "Nothing," she said, and for her, that was peace. She stood, steadying herself. The night air felt real again. Present, her commander exhaled, the weight of survival settling into his bones. He turned to the others. "Pack up," he said. "We're going home." Specter didn't move right away. She let the silence settle. Let the moment breathe. Because for once, she wasn't ahead of the world. She was standing inside it. And somehow, that felt like the biggest victory of all. As the team gathered their gear, Specter breathed in the cold night air and allowed herself a single thought. If you had a few seconds of warning in your life, what moment would you change? The question wasn't for her. It was for anyone listening, anyone who understood what it meant to live with consequences. She took one last look at the empty horizon, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and walked back toward her team. The future, for once, could wait. If stories like this move you, subscribe to MindFront and join me for the next mission.